A very good morning to you and welcome to our continuing coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict. I am Bukola Koka. And we start off immediately this morning as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Indian Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar in New Delhi for talks on a range of issues that will include the Israel-Gaza conflict, West Asia and Indo-Pacific. Blinken will be joined by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who arrived yesterday for what some term the 2+2 dialogue with Jaishankar and the Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. Discussions which should hold this morning will pick up the threads from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's successful visit to Washington in June and President Joe Biden's trip to New Delhi for the G20 summit in September. And the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived New Delhi just ahead of talks in India. India, which has growing ties with the U.S., has also maintained its long-standing relations with Russia and improved economic relationships with oil and gas-producing countries in the Middle East. Meantime, meetings between Qatar's Emir Sheikh Al Thani and United Arab Emirates President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in Abu Dhabi have just been concluded. During the meeting, the two leaders discussed the situation in Gaza. Footage released by UAE's Ministry of Presidential Affairs showed the meeting, which was also attended by Qatari's Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. The two leaders reinforced the UAE and Qatar's calls for an immediate ceasefire, unimpeded humanitarian access, and the protection of all civilians. The meeting came after the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and Israeli Mossad chiefs met with the Qatari Prime Minister in Doha to discuss the parameters of a deal for hostage releases and a pause in Hamas-Israel fighting in the Gaza Strip. And it's just another typical day in the troubled area since October the 7th, with people running in the Red Sea port city of Eilat while air sirens blare. An unidentified drone hit a civilian building in the southern Israeli city, causing some damage. Yemen's Houthi movement says it fired ballistic missiles towards the Red Sea port city. The drone that struck the building in Eilat is under review. There are no reports of injuries as of yet. Meanwhile, explosions have hit Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital in the early hours of today. People gathered outside the hospital entrance in Gaza City, and they could be heard shouting and seen fleeing from the site. An estimated 6 people have died in the attack. Israeli forces raided the Palestinian city of Jenin on Thursday and engaged in a gun battle for several hours, in which 14 people were killed. This is one of the heaviest clashes in the occupied West Bank in months. Rubble and debris were strewn across the streets of Jenin following the raid. Witnesses say gunfire sounded for hours as Israeli troops fought well-armed militants in the streets of Jenin and its adjacent refugee camp, where hundreds of heavily armed gunmen are based. Amongst those killed is a 15-year-old boy. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 4 more Palestinians were killed by Israeli soldiers in separate incidents across the West Bank. Clashes also flared elsewhere in the West Bank, with deaths reported close to Bethlehem, Nablus and Hebron, as well as on the outskirts of Ramallah, the main city in the territory. And the U.S. State Department says there will now be 2 humanitarian corridors allowing people to flee areas of hostility in the northern Gaza. According to the White House, Israel has agreed to pause military operations in parts of North Gaza for 4 hours a day from Thursday.
There will be 2 humanitarian corridors allowing people to flee the areas of hostilities in the northern part of Gaza. The first such corridor, open between 4 and 5 hours every day for the past few days, has already enabled many thousands of people to reach safer areas. The second route along the coastal road will enable many more thousands to reach safer areas in the south. And of course, we are continuing to work closely with our Israeli partners to address and remain vigilant about efforts from Hamas to discourage and prevent civilians from fleeing this area. And as we talk about this movement of civilians, it's also critical that humanitarian supplies and assistance are expanded in the areas where people are moving. In the case specifically of southern Gaza, over the course of yesterday, we saw 106 trucks of humanitarian aid flow into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. Rafah crossing remains open today for the inflow of humanitarian aid as well as the safe departure of foreign nationals. So we'll continue to work towards this and make sure that there is apt flow each day.
Now, the Red Cross has resumed patient escorts to the Gaza border. The organization halted operations temporarily after its convoy came under fire earlier this week. The International Committee of the Red Cross, a neutral organization based in Geneva, has escorted patients and freed hostages out of Gaza since the Israel-Hamas conflict began more than a month ago and is protected under international humanitarian law.
For those who have been displaced to the south of the Gaza Strip, they are having to live in extremely difficult and cramped conditions in overflowing shelters that do not have proper access to water and to sanitation, and the situation is frankly alarming.
And during these pauses, that's the humanitarian pauses that the Israeli Defense Forces have begun to implement, the aim is to get up to 150 aid trucks daily to increase the flow of food, water and medicine into the region. In a series of posts on X, Biden said the U.S. is focused on increasing humanitarian supplies and assistance. Israel agreed to pause military operations in parts of North Gaza for 4 hours a day, but there has been no sign of a let-up in the fighting that has killed thousands. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggested any pauses would be scattered, and there is no official confirmation of a plan for recurring breaks. The United Nations is insisting that any halt to fighting between Israel and Palestinian militants Hamas in the Gaza Strip for humanitarian purposes would need to be coordinated by it. It urged all parties to the conflict to be in agreement for a truly effective exercise.
Not long ago, I mean,
of the hostages.
well, we've just seen the press reports not long ago. I mean, how any such halt in the fighting and how it would work for humanitarian purposes would need to be coordinated with the United Nations, especially on the issue of timings and location. And obviously, in order for this to be done safely for humanitarian purposes, it would have to be agreed with all parties to the conflict to be truly effective. We saw this like you did, right, on press reports. Well, I'm just talking to you about kind of the principles on our end, right? If these things are to be effective for humanitarian purposes, they need to be coordinated with us as we are the deliverers of humanitarian assistance, especially on timing and location. And it's, of course, critical that all the parties to this conflict also agree with them. But we're obviously trying to seek out more information.
We're now joined by former Commander, Operation Safe Haven, and Chief of Defense Research and Development, Major General Henry Ayola. He will give us his perspective about the war and the way forward. Thank you very much for joining us, Commander, Major General Henry Ayola.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me this morning. Good morning, viewers.
Indeed, a very good morning to you, sir. Not a little condemnation has trailed Israel's style of prosecution of this war, which has led to the death of a number of civilians, a huge civilian casualty. The numbers coming from the Palestinian Health Ministry is over 10,000. What other strategy would the IDF have adopted in the prosecution of this war that would have led to less casualty?
Thank you very much. That's a good place to start and a good question. Well, when you take note of the fact that what the IDF is doing is a reprisal war, as it were, even though that's also contestable, because it all depends on each analyst where you're starting from. For some people, the war has been on even before the attack of 7th October. But if you take it that this war started 7th of October, then you'll be able to, toe the line of seeing it from the fact that IDF is simply responding to what happened 7th of October. So if that's the premise, then of course, one will not be far from the truth to see with the eyes of the strategic planners of Israel that, judging and interrogating the altruism of what the Prime Minister himself has said, that there'll be no ceasefire, there'll be no change of strategy, no operation art or tactics until the hostages are released. Now, that's an euphemism for what I would call the strategic end state for Israel. Because, if you look at it, what they will want to do is to make sure this never happens again. The popular phrase, never again. And that would mean that there will be some undeclared strategic end state that is being pursued. And until that is achieved, I don't see them having to change strategy. Of course, there are several strategies. You apply strategies based on the situations. You have to look at the several factors involved. And when we realize that this war, even though it's called Isreal-Hamas war, that itself is a myth. Because when you look at it closely from historical antecedents, it's simply Israel-Arab war. If you look at it in terms of races and ethnicity, if you look at it globally, this is a clash of civilization. If you look at it religiously, this is also a cultural clash. So there are many dimensions to this. So based on that, you will discover that they will change strategies as long as those strategies are consistent towards achieving their end game, their end state. So for me, yes, if I'm to suggest, yes, there's so much that can be done to limit casualties. Of course, casualties, there is so much effort you can make as a party to any war, one of the belligerents, to reduce casualty. But of course, casualty also goes beyond the control of the belligerents. Because even there are what we call fratricidal fires, where you rain fire on your own self. So it's not like something that is totally under your control. There are other factors that are beyond the controls of the belligerents, So that's my take on that.
So much to pick from the things that you have said. But I'll start from your commentary on this being the strategic end state for Israel. Now, I'd like you to expatiate on what exactly you mean by that. And also, if this has anything to do with the declaration by Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, just days ago, who said Israel will take permanent security responsibility for the Gaza Strip. And many have been wondering, what does that even mean? So are they related? Strategic end state for Israel and permanent security responsibility for Gaza?
Yes, thank you very much. That's another wonderful question. Yeah, in fact, that's a very good hint for us to understand the mind of the strategic leaders in Israel. Because when you look at it closely, you ask, they will ask themselves, why did we allow this to happen? Okay? And whatever lapses there were, the status quo antebellum, that's before this war started. whatever those lapses were, they will do everything to ensure that they block those loopholes. They will do everything to deter, to degrade, to defeat, and decimate the Hamas war chest, as it were. And so, and until that is achieved, they are not likely to think of a change of strategy. Until that is achieved, they are not likely to even think of, I know they're talking about strategic, some tactical pauses or local tactical pauses to allow for humanitarian movement, 4 hours and all of that. All of those are desirable things, but they will only be applied as long as they are consistent with achieving and the pursuance of the strategic end state. Now, let me now explain what the strategic end state is. Usually, when a nation is at war, at the grand strategic level, that's at the national level, at the presidential or prime ministerial cabinet level, or the National Security Council level, they will have defined, more often than not, this never really given, in the open, they will have defined to themselves, what their strategic end state is. So for us as analysts and outsiders, you can only make a good guess, from the utterances of the leaders, from the way the progression of the war thus far, and of course from historical antecedents. Of course, and that is very germane when it comes to Israel, because it's not the first war. From May 14, 1948 to now, you know how many wars that Israel has fought with, with her Arab neighbors. From the War of Independence to the Sinai campaign in 1956, to the Six-Day War in 1967, to the Yom Kippur War, to the Lebanon War, to the Intifada 1 and 2, to the perpetual state of attrition that is, on with their neighbors. So for them, this is a reality that is that they face every day. For us, from our side, we can suggest so many things, but for Israel to ensure its continuity and existence, they have to be able to at least guarantee that this never happens again. And that's why when the Prime Minister is saying they will take responsibility for security after this whole thing, that also is in furtherance of that. That yes, even when this has been settled, they have to ensure that the only way they can live side by side in the two-state solution, which is not even yet acceptable to Hamas, is to ensure that they can secure their borders better than they have done before. And that will mean, extending their frontiers to the point where they can, preempt this kind of happening again. So their strategic end state is the highest aim of the war. That's what it is. It is from there that the operational aim, the tactical missions and all of that will derive. And that's how wars are fought. Yeah.
And I imagine that this comes with a lot of implications for both Israel and her Arab neighbors, particularly where land is concerned. But that apart, you talked earlier on about Israel determined to decimate the war chest of Hamas. And speaking of that, we've heard a number of reports in the last couple of days about Hamas keeping rockets in a Boy Scout building meant for children, where children play. We've heard, about Hamas bearing weapons in swimming pools, that, host civilian population. We've also heard about Hamas dropping rockets, which was the first strategy, on October the 7th in the first place, dropping drones over Israeli land. What's the capacity of these drones, and how much damage can it do from the military perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, drones, come in different shades and types. It depends on the payload. Drones are what you call unmanned area vehicles. You could have unmanned area vehicles that are not armed. That could be for surveillance, where you have cameras mounted just to do the work of surveillance. And that's what we call command control, computer communications, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. You have them within that spectrum. So it depends on the payload. But of course, for armed drones, Then, of course, it also depends on what kind of arm the drone is carrying. So, of course, the idea of drone is to reduce the human vulnerability and thereby reducing human casualties in war. So that what men ordinarily would have done, you have a machine that is not manned by a human, and the pilot is external to it and controlling it from a safe distance and all of that. And so you can deploy as many of that and save your pilots, rather than putting pilots in planes and each plane that is brought down, one or two pilots are gone. That's basically the advantage of drones. Of course, apart from the fact that they can stay overhead, any target for as long as the endurance that is determined by the make of that drone, and then you can recall them, you can refit them, and set them. So the issue of fatigue when it comes to human beings is also not there. So that's another advantage about drones. So the damage drones can do is it's unlimited. It's a function of first what the mission is, what kind of payload is carrying, and what kind of effect that is determined to achieve by the users, either side of the war. Okay, so that's basically it.
Another two issues now, and this is another angle to Hamas's capacity, which was Iran's support or the alleged support of Iran for Hamas. And we've heard Benjamin Netanyahu say vehemently that if Hezbollah joins in this war, that it would have made the mistake of its life. What are the implications of Iran's continued support for Hamas, particularly if there is no, possibility of peace in sight, and if perhaps Hezbollah does not take that threat, lightly, and decides to join in the near future? Those two issues, talk us through them.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's start from even the very beginning. Like I said, calling it Israel-Hamas war in itself is a myth. In fact, it's the beginning of deception. Because the truth of it, Hamas could not have acted alone when they attacked on the 7th of October. It would be foolhardy for anybody to do that. So, in fact, another thing to think about is what was Hamas' strategic end state? Did they have promises from other Arab, cultural, civilizational, religious support from different? Because it's not new. Like I said, Israel-Arab war has been on in different forms, shapes, and types. So that talking about Hezbollah joining, Hezbollah is part of it from the onset, as far as I'm concerned. Already we have reports of Hezbollah firing from Lebanon, having Houthis firing from Yemen, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad being part of this, supporting both from within Gaza and from the West Bank. So all of these are already parties to the conflict. It would be simplistic for anybody to think that Hamas is doing this alone. So let's come to Iran. Very interestingly, and this has always been my solution preferred to this perpetual state of belligerence between the Arabs and the Israelis. Because Iran, for example, let's not even talk about the wisdom literatures, because these are people and religions of that derive from Abraham. These are monotheism religions that are all emanating from the same one progenitor, which ordinarily should have made it easy to have peace between Iran, the Arabs, and Israel. But much more, even when you look into the history of Iran, for example, they had King Cyrus the Great of Persia Kingdom or Persia Empire, who was the one that even gave a decree and gave all the logistics requirements, all of the support to release the Israeli exiles in Babylon at the time, around 538 AD, BC rather, to to release them to go and rebuild Israel, Jerusalem, and the temple. So when you imagine that this same Iran, no, this is in their own annals, in their own chronicles, apart from the the wisdom literature that are replete with so many scriptures as to who owns that land and who gave that land and all of that. So you will wonder then, where is this enmity coming from? And that, for me, is a start place. That I think it's just a matter of pleading with the parties to embrace peace. Embrace peace. Let's go back, to our histories. Let's appreciate some of the things that have been done in the past and put behind us this era of perpetual fight. Because when you imagine the number of wars that Israel has fought, and of course, in 1948, that the immediately 14th of May 1948, when the state of Israel was declared, the next day, 6 Arab nations who were contributing troops and several others who contributed logistics were part. Iran has been part of all of this all along too. So it is something that we have to find a different solution to. Certainly, wars will not be the solution. And the peace in the Middle East has been eluding the Middle East for so long. And the only way is for everybody, including Iran, to come to the point and say, look, enough of this. Let's make peace, genuine peace. Not by deception and seduction, genuine peace. That we bring it to the point where we can now start talking of real peace. But talking about Iran, of course, is being the sponsor of, we know that, and they don't hide it. It's a national policy in Iran that they want to wipe out Israel out of the global map. So for a nation to make that a national policy, what else do you need to hear from them to know that they are perpetually at war with this state of Israel? So it's a decision that has to be made. I think we need to keep appealing to the parties involved. The Iranian support to Houthis, to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to Hezbollah, to Hamas, and all the other pockets of, they are using for global terrorism. I think then they are the ones who need to come to that point to say, look, let's put an end to this. What are we gaining from it? We all need peace for there to be development and advancement of humanity as a whole. Yeah, thank you very much.
Interesting there, and there is a consensus that it's not a military action that will be the enduring solution to the continuing Israel-Arab conflict. And of course, we may have to do another study on how the patterns of the war of civilization, how they have gone in history, to know how this will just pan out. But speaking of relations in the Middle East, there are increasing worries about Israel's isolation, particularly with countries in the Middle East that it had built relationship with in the last couple of years, talking about Qatar, talking about the United Arab Emirates, which are the wealthy countries in the Middle East, by the way. In the light of these current circumstances where we have not had pro-Palestinian protests in those countries, what are the implications of these? Where do they stand, the UAE and Qatar, amid this pro-Palestinian, this Israel-Hamas conflict? What inferences can you draw from here?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we are aware that Qatar is midwifing some tripartite diplomatic moves and to come to an agreement. In fact, yesterday there was a meeting chaired by the Qatari officials with intelligence chiefs from Israel, US, in trying to find peace to this. Of course, for Qatar and for UAE, and of course, we kudos to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We know that there was even ongoing efforts also to make similar peace with Saudi Arabia before this incident started, or this war started. So it will be good for other Arab nations and for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to continue to reach out, diplomatically to other Arab nations. And as we talk about this, my mind goes straight to their former Prime Minister Ishaq Rabin, who paid a huge price for the peace effort, and even Anwar Sadat of Egypt, who also were these two heroes of peace. They were actually assassinated by their, some funny group of their own people for making genuine effort to make peace, And I think we need more of that. We need to do something to the different countries to silence those small groups that are against making this peace. Because when you look at it, it's as if there are some people who see this perpetual state of war with Israel as a business, as their life endeavor. So they don't really want peace. They are benefiting from this state of perpetual, war. And even when they pretend to be making moves for peace, they don't really mean it. I mean, I remember when Yasser Arafat signed the Declaration of Principle in 1993, then with Yitzhak Rabin in Washington, D.C. And when he came back, and some people felt he was betraying the Arab or Islamic cause and all of that. And he talked about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and all of this just shows how altruistic some of these moves really are. I mean, you wonder whether they really mean them or they just to be seen, to be engaging, while the belligerent state keeps, goes on, So I think it's a plea from the whole global community to the Arab nations, to Israel and all parties involved, including Turkey, to let's make genuine peace. Let's mean it this time around. Let's put an end to this perpetual state of belligerence and let's bring peace and let the world move forward from this point. Yeah, thank you.
Joined by Major General Henry Ayola, former commander, Operation Safe Haven. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and contributions on the program today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
And still to come on the program, Islamic Jihad Group spokesperson in Gaza says group is ready to free 2 Israeli hostages for humanitarian and medical reasons. We'll have that story and more coming your way after this break. Join us again. Welcome back. The armed wing of the Palestinian group Islamic Jihad in Gaza is prepared to release 2 Israeli hostages, a woman and a boy, for humanitarian and medical reasons. That's according to a spokesperson for the Al-Quds brigades in a message recorded on Thursday, in which he added that appropriate conditions must be met. The group released a video showing an elderly woman and a young boy who are among approximately 240 hostages seized by militant gunmen who attacked Israel on October the 7th. Israel described the newly released videos as an important sign of life, but declined to be drawn on whether they would be released, saying that would be to play into the captors' psychological warfare. The 12-year-old Israeli boy, whose imminent liberation has been announced by Islamic Jihad in Gaza, featured in a short film produced last week by an award-winning director as part of the campaign to free him. The boy's mother, interviewed, narrated the short animated film which depicted her 2 sons being taken hostage on October the 7th in the wave of Hamas attacks on Israel. Renana Gom chose to tell the story of her children, Yagil, 12, or 16, who were taken from kibbutz Nir while they were alone at home. In the film created and directed by the animator Yoni Goodman, well known in Israel for the film Waltz with Bashir about the 1982 Lebanon War. The film retraces the last moments Yagil and Or spent in the safe room of their home on the phone with their mother while Hamas fighters were entering the building. 2 of the 4 hostages released by Hamas so far told Gom they think they've heard her children whilst in captivity, news that makes Gom believe her sons are still alive.
Bargain chips, they're children. Children anywhere in the world are not supposed to be part of this. Not in Gaza, nor in Israel, nor in Ukraine, nowhere in the world.
On Saturday morning, October 7th, at 6:30 in the morning, the red alert went off and a barrage of missiles fell on our house in Kibbutz Nir Oz. My sons, 12 and 16 were alone in my house sleeping. They got into the safe room.
Anyone who sees this can imagine his own children in his house or her house, alone in this nightmare.
Even though my son tried hard to hold it closed, the door to the safe room was pushed open.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has condemned the recent violence against the Jewish communities in the country. Late on Wednesday, shots were fired at 2 Jewish schools in Montreal overnight and clashes between students at a university in the same city. Police on Wednesday said they were investigating overnight shootings at the schools in Montreal. Both schools reported finding a bullet hole in their front doors, but there were no injuries, and it is not clear whether the incidents are linked. On Wednesday, a violent altercation at Concordia University between people aligned with opposing sides of the conflict in Israel and Gaza resulted in injuries and an arrest, according to local CBC News. Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante told a news conference the city will not accept those acts and will investigate violent and hateful events. Vincent Richard, Montreal's deputy police chief, also said there had been an increase in hate crimes in the last couple of weeks, while reiterating police will increase visibility measures in the vicinity of places of worship.
Violence against students in Concordia University. I'm thinking about the attack of a synagogue in Dollard des Ormeaux on Monday night, and the hateful comments that are spilled.
Brazilian Justice Minister Flávio Dino has delivered a stiff rebuke to Israel after its Mossad spy agency said it had helped foil an attack by the Islamist militant group Hezbollah on Jewish targets in Brazil. Mr. Dino was responding to a highly unusual statement published on Wednesday in which Israel's Mossad agency thanked Brazilian police and said that given the backdrop of the war in Gaza, Hezbollah was continuing to attack Israeli, Jewish and Western targets. Earlier on Wednesday, Brazil's federal police arrested 2 unnamed people on terrorism charges and carried out 11 search and seizure warrants on properties. However, Dino did not explicitly deny any of the details in the Israeli statement, but seemed more angered by its timing, tone and the link it drew to the current war in Gaza. Claudio Lottenberg, president at the Brazilian-Israeli Confederation, said the arrests were done efficiently and the situation creates a concerned scenario that is not usual in Brazil. And joining us now is Oleksiy Izak, head of sector at the National Institute for Strategic Studies, a governmental research body of Ukraine. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Oleksiy Izak. I hope I got your name correctly. Pardon me if I did not.
Yes, you are correct.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Could it be safe to say that the Israel-Hamas conflict has taken away attention from the Russia-Ukraine war? And indeed, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also talked about that and warned about fatigue in prosecuting the Russia-Ukraine war in his appeal to Western powers. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Distraction of attention from Ukraine to this new war is obviously bad news for Ukraine because support of Ukraine diminished and it's really a problem in state when this war with Russian-Ukrainian war is a state of stalemate and Ukraine has to survive another difficult winter to start the occupation of our territories. So it's not obviously it's not good news. This new war it's not good news for the world. But what is good news is that it seems that this Israeli-Palestinian war will not lead to big escalation, and there are some hopes that this conflict, this war will be local ends with some sort of local solution without big global consequence of escalation.
And what are the options open to Ukrainian President Zelensky in his continuing appeal for support to Western powers amid, the renewed concentration on the Israel-Hamas conflict? And in which areas can he explore to get more support?
We don't need more support. We need continuation of support and some changes in forms of this support regarding weapons and technique on battlefield. But as to the main appeal, the main idea of appealing for support from the West is that Israel and Ukraine are on the same side of the global front between fighting coalition in situation when great powers begin to compete with hot wars. And so this is our appeal, our Ukrainian appeal to the West, that we are on the same side, and it is impossible to solve situation in Middle East without solving situation in Ukraine.
When you say that, how do you mean? What are the similarities between the situation in the Middle East and the situation in Ukraine? And what would be the implications if both issues or both locations, the war in both locations, are not tackled simultaneously?
I would remind that Iranian drones are fighting on side of Russia against Ukraine, and some Iranian forces are fighting against Israel in the Middle East. The main similarity is that both Ukraine and Israel has a big security problem, an existential security problem. There are some countries that reject the very existence of Ukraine and Israel. In case of Ukraine, it's Russia, and in case of Israel, it's Iran and some forces in other countries. So it's the big similarity. And the West, in both cases, in case of Israel and Ukraine, they support the right of our countries to exist. So the forces of the world that try to destroy world order and challenge the West in global competition, they hit both Israel and Ukraine and may hit another countries to continue. So the problem is to stop this global war, and stopping this global war means both Ukraine and Israel should withstand this situation.
Now, international relations experts have, drawn the attention to the continuing deterioration of adherence to rules and international laws, which have brought the world to where it is now, i.e. the war, the Israel-Hamas conflict, and of course not forgetting the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Do you have any worries that Western leaders, global leaders now at the United Nations level have lost sight of this deterioration, and what could the implications be in the long term rather than short term?
The long implication would be building the new world order, and you are right that it's not guaranteed that Western built order will survive all the situation. I believe all countries have to view in the future and try to adapt their strategies. But my view is that both situation in Ukraine and Israel may be solved without drastic and dramatic changes. Some sort of restoring status quo is possible, I believe.
The humanitarian pauses that we've seen as we coast home now in Israel-Hamas, as the war continues, have those pauses been effective, particularly in the light of concerns expressed just this morning that there has been no let-up in fighting? And while you're looking at that, on a holistic level, what are the options open to exploring peace, for leaders on both sides of the divide in the Middle East and, of course, in Europe as the Russia-Ukraine war goes on?
It's a difficult situation. When I told you that Ukraine and Israel has similarity in geopolitical situation, that we have some similar existential threat, it does not mean that Ukraine supports Israeli policy and that we have sympathy to abuses of human rights and excessive use of force. Certainly not. Children, civilians, protected peoples in all regions should be protected, and any deterioration of humanitarian situation finally leads to exacerbating problems and continuation of the war. So it is very important that Israel would be to the maximum attentive to humanitarian problems in Palestine and allow international humanitarian organization to support population. So it's the same problem as in Ukraine, that we have very severe consequences of Russian assault of us, and it will foster hatred for many years along. So it's very important to avoid humanitarian disasters during the war, both in Ukraine and Israel.
Indeed, the humanitarian implications and the psychological implications as well in the long term are interesting, important subjects that leaders must reflect on as the war rages on, and with hopes, strong hopes for peace. Would like to thank you very much, Mr. Oleksiy Izak, head of sector at the National Institute for Strategic Studies, governmental research body of Ukraine. Thank you for joining us on our continuing coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Thank you.
And still to come on the program, Copenhagen, Berlin mark 85th anniversary of Holocaust with lights and marches. Details later. Join us again. Welcome back. Brazilian Rafael Berman was with his friends enjoying the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel near the border with Gaza when Hamas gunmen attacked on October the 7th. Berman recalled the horror of the Hamas attack during an event in memory of Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, in Nazi Germany in 1938. The memorial was organized by the Jewish Immigration and Holocaust Memorial Museum on Thursday in Sao Paulo. The 30-year-old native of Sao Paulo said he thought he would die that day and sent a voice note to his mother to say goodbye amid the attack. Berman had been living in Tel Aviv since 2018 with his mother and sister, and after much hesitation decided to return to Brazil after the start of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Protesters entered BlackRock's offices in Hudson Yards, New York, to accuse the asset manager of being complicit in the war on Gaza. Chanting, "BlackRock, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide," demonstrators held a banner in the lobby at the company's building. A humanitarian catastrophe has unfolded as basic supplies run out and wounded people overwhelm a fragile medical system. And crowds of people gathered in Copenhagen on Thursday to take part in a torch march against anti-Semitism, marking the 85th anniversary of the Nazis' Kristallnacht pogrom of Jews. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, members of parliament and members of Denmark's Jewish community were among the hundreds who carried torches from the city's main synagogue to parliament. In November 1938, about 1,000 synagogues were damaged or destroyed across Germany and Austria by Nazi mobs during the Night of Broken Glass. At least 91 Jews were murdered, about 7,500 Jewish businesses ransacked, and some 30,000 Jewish men and boys arrested during the assaults which preceded the Holocaust, or Shoah, in which around 6 million Jews were killed.
Come here so we do not forget what happened 85 years ago. It was the start of Holocaust, the darkest chapter in the history for hundreds of years, and of course also in the light of what happened the 7th of October, where 1,400 Israelis were slaughtered in the Middle East.
It's the only place to be tonight in Copenhagen, in my opinion, in order to show that we have to stand up against racism, against Islamism, and against Nazism.
I think there's too much polarization in Denmark, and I sympathize with the Jewish people who are living in Denmark. I think it's a terrible war. I think it's terrible for the Palestinians also.
Just one of the many lessons to take home from a program today as we hope to continue to spread love regardless of where we belong, which side we belong. Thank you so much for watching the program today. Join us again, same time tomorrow, when we bring you another edition of our continuing coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I am Bukola Koka. Bye for now.